The stars were cold and silent in Sector 9. They had always been cold, and they would remain cold long after every ship had turned to dust. But Lieutenant Taiho did not mind the cold. He had grown used to it. He sat alone in the pilot-ready room of the carrier HFY, staring at the viewport while other pilots laughed and played cards behind him. He was 29 years old. His hair was cut short, his uniform was clean, and his face showed nothing. Some pilots wore their kills on their sleeves or painted marks on their ships. Taiho did neither. He did not celebrate death. He simply delivered it, 40-7 kills. That was his record. 47 enemy ships destroyed across 3 years of border patrols and small conflicts. No losses, no retreats, no ejections. The other pilots called him the Ghost because his enemies never saw him coming. They only saw him when it was already too late. Captain Youngji watched him from across the room. She was 42, a veteran of the First Contact Wars, and she had seen many pilots come and go. Some burned bright and died young. Others grew careful and survived. But Taiho was different. He flew like a man who had already made peace with death. Not reckless. Not afraid. Just empty. She knew his file. She knew about the colony on Miryang 4. 3,000 civilians. A surprise raid by unknown attackers. The defense squadron had scrambled to protect the evacuation ships. 12 pilots went up. 1 came back. That one was Taiho. He had been 24 years old. The file said he shot down 9 enemy fighters that day. The file said he kept flying even after his wingman exploded beside him. The file said he landed his burning ship on the last transport and helped carry children to the medical bay before collapsing. The file did not say what he lost that day. It did not need to. Yoonji walked over to him and sat down. She did not speak immediately. She had learned that Taiho did not like empty words. He respected silence more than most people respected conversation. "Command wants you for a patrol tomorrow," she said finally. "Sector 9 border. Standard sweep?" Taiho nodded. He did not ask questions. He never asked questions. "There have been reports," Yoonji continued. "Velen scouts crossing into our space. Nothing confirmed, but be careful." At the mention of the Velen, something flickered in Taiho's eyes. It was gone in an instant, but Yoonji caught it. Everyone in the fleet knew about the Velen. They were one of the elder races. Members of the Galactic Accord for 10,000 years. They had wings once, before they evolved for space. Their bodies were built for high-speed combat. Hollow bones. 6 limbs. Reflexes that made human pilots look like they were moving through water. The Velen had never lost a war. Not once in their entire history. "I will be careful," Taiho said quietly. But they both knew he was lying far across the galaxy. In a space station orbiting a dying red star, the Velen High Command gathered to discuss a problem. The problem had a name, though they did not know it yet. They only knew the reports. 3 strike teams sent to test human defenses. 3 strike teams destroyed. Not defeated, destroyed. Every ship. Every pilot. The recording showed the same thing each time. A single human fighter, small and slow by Velen standards, appearing from nowhere and cutting through their formations like a blade through silk. The human never spoke, never responded to challenges. He simply killed and vanished. The commanders argued about what to do. Some wanted to send a full fleet. Others wanted to ignore the matter. Humans were young and weak. This was surely a trick, some kind of technology they had not yet detected. But one Velen did not argue. He sat in the corner of the chamber, his forearms folded across his chest, his golden eyes watching the recordings again and again. His name was Kale, and he was the greatest pilot the Velen had ever produced. He wore the crimson talon around his neck, the highest honor a Velen warrior could receive. He had earned it by killing over 300 enemy pilots across 11 campaigns. He had fought against the Mordoran, the Sillery, the hive ships of the Outer Reach. He had never been defeated. He had never even been damaged. Kale was old now, by Velen standards. His feathers had turned from bright gold to pale silver. His movements were slower than they had been in his youth. But his eyes were still sharp, and his mind was still faster than any computer. He watched the human pilot on the screen. He watched how the small ship moved, how it predicted attacks before they came, how it found angles that should not exist. And for the first time in many years, Cale felt something stir in his chest. It was not fear. Cale did not know fear. It was something else. Something he had not felt since he was young, and the universe still held mysteries. It was curiosity. "I will go," he said. The chamber fell silent. Every commander turned to look at him. It's a Crimson Talon himself. One of them asked. For a single human? Cale stood slowly. He was tall, even for a Velen. His wings, folded against his back, were scarred from 100 battles. "I have killed warriors from every species in this galaxy," he said. "I have destroyed fleets. I have ended wars. But I have never seen anything like this human. He does not fly like a soldier. He does not fly like a hunter. He flies like something else, something I do not understand." He walked toward the door. "I will go alone. One ship, no escort. If I do not return, you may send your fleets." "And if you do return?" another commander asked. Cale paused at the door. He turned his head slightly, and the light caught his golden eyes. "Then the Velen will have learned something new, and that is worth more than any victory." He left without another word. Back on the HFY, Taiho finished his meal alone in the mess hall. The other pilots had stopped trying to include him in their conversations. They respected him, even admired him, but they did not understand him. How could they? They had not seen what he had seen. They had not lost what he had lost. He returned to his quarters and sat on his bed. The room was bare. No pictures. No decorations. No personal items except for a small metal box on his desk. Inside the box were 12 patches, each one bearing the name of a pilot who had died at Miriang 4. His squadron, his family. He opened the box and looked at the patches. He knew every name, every face, every voice. "Soon," he whispered to them. Not yet. But soon, he closed the box and lay down. Sleep came slowly as it always did. And when it came, he dreamed of fire. Somewhere in the void between stars, a Velen ship dropped out of hyperspace and began its long journey toward human territory. Inside, Cale sat in perfect stillness, his eyes closed, his breathing slow. He was thinking about the human pilot. He was thinking about what it meant to fight someone who was not afraid to die. He had faced such warriors before. They were dangerous, yes, but they were also predictable. A warrior who did not fear death would take risks, make mistakes. But this human was different. He did not take risks. He did not make mistakes. He flew like death itself was his co-pilot, guiding his hands. Showing him the path, Cale opened his eyes and looked out at the stars. "Show me," he said to the darkness. "Show me what you are." The stars did not answer. But somewhere ahead, in a small room on a human carrier, a man with empty eyes was waking from dreams of fire, and the universe held its breath. The region called the Hollow was a graveyard of forgotten things. Ancient ships drifted here, their crews long dead, their missions long forgotten. Asteroids tumbled slowly through the darkness, carrying the dust of worlds that no longer existed. Sensors became confused in the Hollow. Signals bounced and twisted. Pilots who entered often did not return. Taiho flew through this place alone. His ship, AKF-7 to Swallow, was small and old. The Galactic Accord considered it outdated technology. The newer alien fighters were faster, stronger, and carried weapons that could crack planets. But Taiho did not care about newer ships. He knew the Swallow. He understood its limits. He trusted it. He had been flying for 3 hours when the signal came. It was a broadcast on all channels, open and unencrypted. A voice spoke in careful, practiced human language. The accent was strange, the words slightly wrong, but the meaning was clear. Human pilot. I am Cale of the Velen, bearer of the Crimson Talon. I challenge you to single combat in the old tradition of my people. Face me with honor and I will grant you a warrior's death. Flee, and I will hunt you down like prey. The choice is yours." Taiho's hand paused over the communication controls. He had heard of the Crimson Talon. Every pilot had. It was the highest honor among the Velen, given only to those who had proven themselves in countless battles. The pilot who wore it was considered untouchable, a living legend. He should call for backup. He should retreat and wait for reinforcements. Captain Youngji would be furious if he engaged alone. The smart thing to do was to survive and report. Taiho had never been very good at doing the smart thing. He opened the channel. "I accept." 3 words. That was all. He did not give his name. He did not ask questions. He simply turned his ship toward the source of the signal and increased speed. Kale watched the human approach on his scanner. He had expected hesitation. He had expected fear, perhaps even a call for help, a desperate attempt to escape. That was what prey did when they faced a predator. But the human came straight at him. No tricks, no evasion. Just a direct approach like a warrior walking to a duel. Interesting, Kale studied the approaching ship. It was small, fragile. One good hit would end the fight. The human had no shields worth mentioning, no weapons that could penetrate Velen armor at range. By every measure, this should be over in seconds, but Kale had not survived 300. Battles by trusting measurements, the 2 ships met in the shadow of a dead cruiser, its hull torn open by some ancient battle. Kale fired first, a precision shot aimed at the human's engine. It should have been a perfect hit. The angle was correct, the timing was correct. The human was not there. Taiho had moved at the last instant, rolling his ship in a direction that made no sense. The shot passed through empty space where he had been a heartbeat before. And then he was behind Kale, firing. Kale twisted away, his reflexes faster than thought. The human's shots missed, but only barely. Closer than anyone had come in years. The dance began. They spiraled through the asteroid field, weaving between rocks the size of mountains. Kale used every technique he knew. The Crimson Dive, a sudden vertical drop that had ended 100 enemies. The folded wing, a complex rotation that created impossible firing angles. The Ancestor's Arc, maneuver so difficult that only 3 Velen had ever mastered it. The human countered. Everything, not with superior technology. Not with tricks or traps. He countered with something Kale could not understand. The human seemed to know what Kale would do before he did it. Not through prediction, not through calculation, but through something deeper. Something instinctive in an hour past. Then, too, their ships began to show damage. Kale's left wing was scarred by a close hit. Taiho's cockpit glass was cracked from debris. They were both running low on fuel, low on ammunition, low on everything except determination. In the 3rd hour, Kale finally understood what he was facing. The human was not trying to win. He was not trying to survive. He was not fighting for glory or honor or any of the things that Kale had always fought for. The human was fighting because he had nothing else left. No fear of death, because death was already his constant companion. No desire for victory, because victory meant nothing to him. He flew like a ghost, because he was already a ghost. He just had not stopped moving yet. Kale had faced fearless warriors before. He had faced suicide attackers and desperate defenders. But this was different. This human was not desperate. He was not trying to sacrifice himself. He was simply existing in a state beyond fear, beyond hope, beyond everything that normal beings felt. It was the most terrifying thing Kale had ever seen. Their ships came together one final time. They were so close that Kale could see into the human's cockpit. He saw a young face, calm and focused. He saw eyes that held no hatred, no rage, no emotion at all. Just a vast and terrible emptiness. Kale had the shot. At this range, he could not miss. One pull of the trigger, and the human would die. He hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, the human fired. The shot tore through Kale's secondary engine, sending his ship spinning. By the time Kale regained control, the human had vanished into the asteroid field. Kale sat in his damaged ship, breathing hard. His hearts were pounding. His feathers were standing on end. He had not felt this way since his first battle, when he was young, and the universe was still full of things that could kill him. He should pursue. He should hunt the human down and finish what they started. That was the Velen way. That was what honor demanded. But honor was not what made Kale leave. He turned his ship and flew back toward Velen's space, leaving the human alive behind him. Something else made him leave. Something he had seen in those empty eyes. A reflection. A mirror. A glimpse of what he might become if he kept fighting long enough. Kale had always believed that the greatest warriors were those who feared nothing. Now he understood the truth. The greatest warriors were those who had already lost everything, and they were not admirable. They were warnings. Back on the HFY, Captain Youngji was waiting when Taiho landed. His ship was barely holding together. Smoke poured from 3 different holes. The landing was more of a controlled crash than anything else. She wanted to yell at him. She wanted to demote him, ground him, anything to make him understand how stupid he had been. But when she saw his face through the cracked cockpit glass, she said nothing. He looked the same as always, calm, empty, untouched by the battle that should have killed him, the Velen. She asked. He left. Taiho said simply. Left. The Crimson Talon ran away from you? Taiho climbed out of his ship. His hands were steady. His breathing was normal. He might have been returning from a training exercise instead of a 3-hour battle with the deadliest pilot in the galaxy. He did not run, Taiho said quietly. He saw something. I do not know what. But he saw something and he chose to leave. He walked past her toward the ready room. Youngji watched him go. She had 100 questions, but she knew he would not answer them. Taiho never answered questions about his fights. He just survived them and moved on. But somewhere in the void, a Velen legend was flying home with new thoughts in his head. And somewhere in the cargo hold of the HFY, a small metal box held 12 patches that would never be worn again. The first meeting was over, but both pilots knew, without needing to speak it, that it was not the last. Some battles cannot be finished in a single fight. Some enemies become something else entirely. And some warriors recognize each other across the vast emptiness of space, seeing in each other the reflection of what they fear most. The stars watched in silence. They had seen this before. They would see it again. War was coming, and with it, a reckoning that neither side was prepared for. Kale could not sleep. For the first time in decades, his mind would not be quiet. He lay in his chamber on the Velen homeworld, staring at the ceiling. Watching the shadows move as the twin moons crossed the sky outside his window, he had told no one about his failure. When he returned, he simply reported that the human threat was being assessed and that further action would be determined later. The High Command accepted this. They trusted him. He was Kale, after all. The Crimson Talon, the undefeated. But he knew the truth. He had been defeated. Not by weapons or tactics, but by something far worse. He had been defeated by a question he could not answer. What made the human fly like that? Kale rose from his bed and walked to his personal archive. The room was filled with trophies from his many campaigns. Weapons taken from fallen enemies, medals and honors from grateful commanders. Recording devices that held the final moments of pilots he had killed. None of it meant anything now. He sat at his terminal and began to search. He wanted to understand humanity. Not their ships or their weapons, but their minds, their souls. What made them different from every other species he had faced? The search took him to strange places. He found recordings of human wars, not the ones they fought against aliens, but the ones they fought against each other. He watched cities burn. He watched soldiers march through mud and snow. He watched ships sink into dark oceans while men screamed and drowned. The scale of it shocked him. Humans had killed more of their own kind than the Velen had killed in all their wars combined. They had invented weapons that could destroy their entire planet, and they had come close to using them. They had poisoned their own air, their own water, their own land. They had done terrible things to each other for reasons that seemed meaningless, and yet they survived. Again and again, no matter how badly they hurt themselves, they rebuilt. They learned, they grew. They reached for the stars even when their own world was still broken. Cale found human philosophy next. He read about their beliefs, their values, their understanding of life and death. Most of it was confusing. Humans contradicted themselves constantly. They believed in peace, but prepared for war. They preached love, but practiced cruelty. They feared death, but rushed toward it eagerly. Then he found a word that had no translation in the Velen language. The word was Jang. He spent hours trying to understand it. Gang was a kind of connection, a bond that formed between people who had shared difficult times together. It was not love, exactly. It was not friendship. It was something deeper and stranger. A feeling that grew slowly over time, built from shared pain and shared survival. Cale thought about his own people. Velen warriors respected each other. They honored the strong and remembered the fallen. But they did not have Zhang. They did not form bonds through suffering. Suffering was simply something to be overcome, a test to be passed. But humans were different. For humans, suffering was not just a test. It was a connection. The more they suffered together, the more they belonged to each other. The more they lost, the more they held on to what remained. He thought about the human pilot, the ghost. The man with empty eyes who flew like death itself was his co-pilot. What had he lost? What bonds had been broken? What suffering had created that emptiness? And suddenly, Cale understood. The human was not empty. He was full. It's full of the ghosts of everyone he had lost. Full of the memories he could not escape. Full of a Jang so powerful that it had become the only thing keeping him alive. He flew the way he did because he was carrying them with him. Every battle, every maneuver, every shot fired and every hit taken. He was not fighting alone. He was fighting with the dead. The realization made Cale's blood run cold, far away. On the carrier, Hechi Taiho was being questioned. The Admiralty Board had summoned him to headquarters, a massive station in orbit around Earth. They wanted answers. How had he survived a battle with the Crimson Talon? What techniques had he used? What advantages did he have that could be taught to other pilots? Taiho sat in a metal chair in a metal room, facing 5 admirals who looked at him like he was a puzzle to be solved. They asked their questions. He answered in short sentences. Yes, no, I do not know. They grew frustrated. Lieutenant one of them said finally, "You engaged the greatest pilot in Velen history and survived. Do you understand how significant that is? We need to know how you did it. We need to be able to train others." Taiho was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. "I do not fly to win," he said. "I fly because I am the only one left who remembers their faces." The admirals exchanged confused looks. "Whose faces?" one asked. "My squadron, Miriang 4. 12 pilots. They trusted me. They followed me. They died while I survived." Taiho's voice was flat, emotionless. "I remember all of them, their names, their voices, the way they laughed, the way they flew. I carry them with me. Every time I go into battle, they are there. That is admirable," an admiral said carefully. "But it does not explain your combat effectiveness." Taiho looked at the admiral directly for the first time. His eyes were dark and deep, like looking into a well with no bottom. "You cannot teach what I do," he said, "because what I do is not a technique. It is a choice. 8. I choose to never let them be forgotten. I choose to fight as if they are still beside me. And because of that choice, I cannot be afraid. Fear belongs to people who have something to lose. I have already lost everything that matters." The admirals had no response to that. The meeting ended shortly after. Lieutenant Sumi was waiting for him outside the hearing room. She was young, 25, with short dark hair and quick eyes. She had been assigned as his wingwoman 6 months ago. At first, she had tried to talk to him, to understand him, to break through his walls. Now, she simply stayed close and waited. She did not ask about the hearing. She did not ask about the battle. She just walked beside him to the observation deck, where huge windows looked out at the stars and the blue curve of Earth below. They stood in silence for a long time. "I had a brother," Sumi said finally. "He was a pilot, too. He died in a training accident when I was 17. After that, I decided to fly. I wanted to understand what he loved about it." Taiho did not respond, but she saw his shoulders relax slightly. He was listening. "I used to be angry," she continued. "Angry at him for dying. Angry at myself for not being there. Angry at the universe for taking him. But now I think I understand. He is not gone. Not really. He is here." She touched her chest, "And as long as I fly, he flies with me." Taiho turned his head slightly. For a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw something in his eyes. Recognition, understanding. "Jang. 12 pilots," he said quietly. "I carry 12. Sumi nodded. "Then you are never alone." It was not much, just a few words between two people who understood loss. But it was the first real connection Taiho had allowed himself in years. Across the galaxy, Kale was still studying, still learning, still preparing for the day when he would face the ghost again. He did not know when that day would come, but he knew it would. Some battles were not about victory or defeat. They were about understanding, and Kale would not rest until he understood. The universe turned slowly, carrying its stars and planets and ships through the endless dark, and two pilots, separated by light years and by everything that made their species different, thought about the same thing. What does it mean to carry the dead? Neither had an answer yet. They were both searching, and somewhere in the spaces between, a war was beginning to take shape. A war that would bring them together once more. 3 months passed. Small conflicts became large ones. Border disputes became invasions. And finally, in the cold space of the narrow expanse, the war that everyone had feared finally arrived. The human fleet gathered in numbers never seen before. 50 carriers, 200 destroyers, thousands of fighters. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. A desperate response to the Velen Armada that was burning its way through the outer colonies. Captain Yunji stood on the bridge of the HFY, watching the tactical display fill with red and blue dots. Red for Velen, blue for human. There were so many dots that they blurred together, a swarm of color representing tens of thousands of lives. "All pilots to stations," she ordered. "Launch in 5 minutes." In the ready room, Taiho pulled on his flight suit. Around him, young pilots were praying, crying, or sitting in shocked silence. Many of them had never seen real combat. They had trained for years, but training was not the same as war. Nothing was the same as war. Lieutenant Sumi appeared at his side. Her face was pale but determined. "Stay on my wing," Taiho said quietly. It was the first order he had ever given her. She nodded. "I will." They launched together into chaos. The narrow expanse was filled with fire. Ships exploded in silent flashes of light. Debris tumbled through the void, tearing through formations and creating deadly obstacles. Pilots screamed and died on open channels. The organized battle plans fell apart within minutes, replaced by desperate survival. Taiho flew through the destruction like a knife through water. His ship moved in ways that should have been impossible, dodging shots and debris with millimeters to spare. Sumi struggled to keep up, her hands shaking on the controls, but she stayed with him. She had promised, and she would not break that promise. They destroyed 5 Velen fighters in the first 10 minutes. Then 10 more, and they lost count. Across the battlefield, Kale watched from the cockpit of his personal fighter. He had not engaged yet. He was waiting, searching. He knew the ghost was here somewhere. He could feel it, like a cold wind across his feathers. And then he saw him. A single human fighter, cutting through a formation of Velen interceptors, like they were nothing. The ship moved in that strange, impossible way that Kale had seen before, the way that haunted his dreams. He pushed his throttle forward and dove into the battle. The other pilots, Velen and human alike, seemed to sense what was happening. They pulled back, creating a sphere of empty space around the two aces. It was not a conscious decision. It was instinct. Prey knew when predators were about to fight. It knew to stay clear. Taiho saw Kale coming. He recognized the ship, the colors, the way it moved. He felt nothing. No fear. No anger. no excitement. Just the calm emptiness that had become his natural state. They came together without words this time. No challenges, no ceremonies. Just two warriors who had unfinished business. The fight was faster than before, more desperate. Both pilots pushed their ships beyond safe limits, pulling turns that threatened to black them out, firing shots that came so close they should have been hits. The vacuum around them filled with energy blasts and debris. Kale used everything he had, every technique, every trick, every lesson learned across 300 kills. He was faster than the human, stronger. His ship was better in every way. But none of it mattered. The ghost matched him, move for move, shot for shot. It was like fighting a mirror, a reflection that knew what he would do before he did it. 10 minutes passed. 20. Their ships began to fail. Kale's right engine was smoking. Taiho's shields were completely gone. They were both running on nothing but will. Sumi watched from a distance, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to help. She wanted to dive in and protect her commander, but she knew she could not. This was beyond her. Beyond anyone. This was something that had to be finished between them alone. The final moment came without warning. Taiho's last engine failed. His ship began to drift, powerless, helpless. He had nothing left. No weapons, no shields, no thrust. He was a dead man floating in space. Kale lined up the shot. At this range, he could not miss. One pull of the trigger, and the ghost would finally die. The legend would end. Velen would have their victory. His finger touched the trigger, and then he looked into the cockpit. The human was not fighting anymore. He was not trying to escape or repair his ship or call for help. He was simply sitting there, hands at his sides, staring back at Kale through the cracked glass of his canopy. His eyes were the same as before, dark, deep, empty. But now Kale saw something else in them. He saw acceptance. He saw peace. He saw a man who was ready to die, who had been ready for a long time, who would welcome death as an old friend. And Kale saw himself. He saw what he would become if he kept fighting, if he kept killing, if he spent another century proving his worth through blood and fire. He would become like this human, empty, hollow, a ghost carrying the weight of everyone he had destroyed. Is this glory? He thought. Is this what victory looks like? He thought about all the pilots he had killed. He had never thought about them before. Not really. They were enemies, obstacles, challenges to be overcome. But now, looking at the human, he wondered, did they have families? Did they have dreams? Did someone somewhere still remember their faces? The human had taught him something without saying a word. Some victories were not worth winning. Some battles were not about who lived and who died, but about what remained afterward. Kale lowered his weapon. He opened a channel. His voice rough with emotions he did not fully understand. Another day? Brother. Then he turned his ship and flew away. Taiho watched the Velen fighter disappear into the chaos of battle. He did not understand why he was still alive. He did not understand why the greatest warrior in the galaxy had chosen to spare him, but something had changed. Something small, deep inside his chest. A crack in the ice that had surrounded his heart for years. The battle ended hours later. Neither side won. Neither side lost. The fleets retreated to their territories, leaving the narrow expanse filled with wreckage and bodies. Thousands had died on both sides. The war was not over, but it had paused. Both sides exhausted and unsure of how to continue. Sumi found Taiho drifting in space, his ship dark and cold. She guided her fighter close and locked a tow cable to his hull. "Commander?" she called over the com. "Are you alive?" Silence. Then, a voice she barely recognized. It was Taiho, but there was something different in his tone. Something she had never heard before. "I am alive," he said quietly. "I do not know why, but I am alive." She towed him back to the HFY. The journey was long and silent. But when they finally landed, when the deck crews rushed forward to pull him from his ruined ship, Sumi saw something that made her stop. Taiho was looking at the young pilots around him, really looking at them, seeing their faces, their fear, their hope, and for just a moment, She thought she saw something in his eyes. It was not emptiness. She thought she saw the beginning of light. The war ended not with a final battle, but with a quiet agreement. Both sides had lost too much. Neither could claim victory. The diplomats met in neutral space and signed papers that changed nothing and everything. The borders returned to where they had been before. The dead stayed dead, and the living were left to figure out what it all meant. Kale returned to the Velen homeworld, different being than the one who had left. He walked through the halls of the military academy where young Velen trained to become warriors. And he saw them differently now. They were so eager, so proud, so certain that glory waited for them among the stars. He had been like them once. He had believed that the highest purpose was to fight and win, to prove himself against every enemy, to collect honors until his name was spoken with reverence across the galaxy. Now he understood how hollow that belief was. He requested a meeting with the High Command. They expected him to ask for a new assignment, a new campaign, a new enemy to destroy. Instead, he asked for something that shocked them. He wanted to teach. They gave him a classroom. 20 young pilots, the best of their generation, ready to learn from the legend himself. They expected lessons about combat techniques and tactical maneuvers. They expected stories of glory and victory. Kale gave them something else. He taught them about humanity, about their history, about their wars and their suffering and their strange, unbreakable spirit. He showed them recordings of human soldiers helping each other through mud and snow. He read them human poems about loss and hope. He explained concepts that had no Velen words, like Jeng, the bond that forms between people who have suffered together. His students were confused at first. Why should they care about humans? Humans were weak, slow, fragile. They were barely worth considering as enemies. I thought the same once, Kale told them. And then I met a human pilot who taught me something I had never understood in 300 battles. What did he teach you? One student asked. Kale was quiet for a long moment. He looked out the window at the sky, where distant stars burned in the darkness. He taught me that strength is not the same as resilience, he said finally. The strongest warriors are not always those who win. Sometimes they are those who lose everything and keep fighting anyway. Not for glory, not for honor, but for the ones they carry with them. The students did not fully understand, but they remembered. And years later, when they faced their own losses and their own defeats, they would think of their old teacher and his strange lessons about humans, and they would understand. Far away on Earth, Taiho faced his own transformation. The Admiralty had promoted him. He was commander now, with his own squadron to lead. He had refused twice. The idea of being responsible for other pilots terrified him. He had failed his first squadron. He had let them die. How could he risk that again? Captain Yunji came to him personally on the third offer. You are not the same man who flew at Miriangfor, she told him. You have changed. I do not know what happened between you and that Velen pilot, but something shifted in you. I can see it. I do not know if I can protect them, Taiho said. I do not know if I am strong enough. Yunji shook her head. That is not what they need. They do not need someone who can protect them from everything. They need someone who understands what loss feels like. Someone who will remember them if they fall. Someone who carries the weight. She paused. You have been carrying 12 for years. Can you not carry a few more? Taiho did not answer immediately. But later that night, he opened the metal box on his desk and looked at the patches inside. 12 names. 12 faces. 12 ghosts who had never left his side. He touched each patch gently. I am going to try something new, he whispered to them. I am going to try to live. Not just survive. Live. I hope you understand. The patches did not answer, but somehow, Taiho felt like they approved. He accepted the command the next morning. His new squadron was young, eager, terrified. They looked at him with wide eyes. This legendary ghost who had faced the Crimson Talon and survived. They expected a hero, a warrior, a man made of steel. Instead, they got someone who learned their names on the first day, someone who asked about their families and their homes, someone who sat with them in the mess hall and listened to their fears. Lieutenant Sumi was his second in command now. She helped him connect with the young pilots, translating his silences into words they could understand. She had learned to read him over the months of flying together. She knew when he was struggling and when he needed space. Slowly, carefully, Taiho began to build something new. Not a wall between himself and the world, but a bridge. He still carried his 12 ghosts. He would always carry them. But now, he had room for others too. 1 year after the war ended, a package arrived for him. It had no return address, no sender information. Just a small box wrapped in plain cloth. Inside was a Velen flight recorder, the kind pilots used to store their personal archives, and attached to it was a note written in careful, practiced human letters. Taiho read the note alone in his quarters. It's human pilot. You ask me, without words, why I fight. For glory. For honor. For my people. These were my answers for many years. But when I saw you, a creature with fragile bones and slow reflexes, flying as if death itself was your passenger, I understood something new. You fight because you cannot forget. And because you cannot forget, you will never stop. This is humanity's gift. This is humanity's curse. I have watched my own people for my entire life. We are strong. We are fast. We are proud. But we do not carry our dead the way you do. We let them go. We move forward. We forget. You have shown me that forgetting is not strength. Remembering is strength. Carrying the weight is strength. I am an old warrior now. My fighting days are behind me, but I will spend my remaining years teaching young Velen what you taught me. I will tell them about the ghost, the human pilot who was never alone because he carried an army of ghosts with him everywhere. He flew. I do not know if we will ever meet again. I do not know if we are enemies or friends or something else entirely. But I know this. I am honored to have seen you. I am honored to have fought you. And I am honored to have learned from you. Fly well, brother. Carry your ghosts with pride. And know that somewhere across the stars a Velen warrior is telling your story. Kale, bearer of the Crimson Talon. Taiho read the letter 3 times. When he finished, he walked to the flight deck, where his squadron was preparing for a training exercise. They looked up as he approached, young faces showing a mix of respect and nervousness. Sumi stood at the front of the group. She had seen the package. She had seen his face when he opened it. She did not ask what was inside. Ready, Commander. She asked simply. Taiho looked at his pilots, his squadron, his responsibility, his new family. He thought about Kale, somewhere far away teaching young Velen about humanity. He thought about the 12 ghosts he carried and the new lives he had been given to protect. He thought about everything he had lost and everything he had found, and for the first time in years he smiled.
Ow.
Let us fly.